You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. My name is Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 168. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Scott Shepherd, who is a veteran writer, producer, and showrunner with years of experience running network series, having overseen hundreds of hours of television. His extensive list of credits includes some of the most popular hit series from the past 3 decades, including The Equalizer, Miami Vice, Quantum Leap, True Calling, and The Dead Zone, to name a few. He has also collaborated with a number of best-selling novelists on various television projects, including Stephen King, Harlan Coben, and Karin Slughter. He is currently teaching television writing in the graduate program at the University of Texas, Austin, and has currently just published his first mystery novel, The Last Commandment, a transatlantic police procedural featuring Austin Grant, a Scotland Yard detective tracking a killer whose victims' deaths correspond to a transgression of one of the 10 Commandments. I really enjoyed talking with Scott about his impressive career in television, making the transition to writing mystery novels, and a whole lot more. So stay tuned for the interview coming up here in just one moment. Before we get to the interview, though, a quick word about Masterclass, offering online classes created for students of all skill levels with instructors that are the best in the world. Check out thrillingreads.com/masterclass, and you can become a better writer with a Masterclass annual membership, which will grant you access to exclusive video lessons taught by literary masters, including Neil Gaiman, David Baldacci, Walter Mosley, Dan Brown, Margaret Atwood, James Patterson, and many more. So check out thrillingreads.com/masterclass. Signing up via that link is a great way to support this podcast financially, so I thank you. All right, here is my interview with Scott Shepherd. And on the podcast today, I have Scott Shepherd, who is a veteran writer, producer, and showrunner with years of experience running network series. His production and screenwriting credits is pretty incredible. It includes The Equalizer, Miami Vice, Outer Limits, Murder, She Wrote, Quantum Leap, which is one of my favorite shows. And The Last Commandment is his first mystery novel, which was published recently on July 13th. Welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me.
And your work as a writer and producer in the TV industry for almost 3 decades. So why the switch to writing books?
Well, I mean, it sort of was a gradual thing. I mean, it was something I always wanted to do. I mean, I've read since I was a little kid. I've collected, lots of thrillers and mysteries. That's what I primarily read. Some horror stuff and some fantasy stuff. And I have like 10,000 first editions. And I really wanted to start doing that, but I just sort of fell into television, out of college. I mean, when I was in college, at Stanford, I actually taught a course on the detective novel and murder mysteries. So I've loved it since I was a kid. But, television was something I also always loved. And that's kind of what I, spent my life doing, but always continued reading. And then one of the things is I kind of moved through the shows and started running shows. I also started working with a bunch of writers, well-known writers that we adapted their work, and they sort of encouraged me to kind of fulfill something I wanted to do. So that started, I would say, I wrote my first 2 books about 5-6 years ago. One was a noir horror thriller, and then the other was an apocalyptic Western. And then this idea for this mystery thriller, The Last Commandment being the start of a series, was something I've had in my head for a long, long time. And then I finally got around to doing it.
Well, so it must have felt good then to finally get that vision out and get it on paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so who were some of the writers? You say you were a fan of mysteries and horror and suspense novels. Who were some of the writers that influenced you? Some of the authors that influenced you as a writer?
Well, I would say the 2 who influenced me the most probably, which kind of was Ross MacDonald when I was in high school. That became my love of sort of modern detective fiction. Him being the follow-up to Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett is always that sort of holy trio. And so it was him. And then on the other side, it was also at the same time with Stephen King. It still continues to be. So I would say those 2 writers, and King, I've had the fortune of working on a couple shows with him, that we've adapted of his. So that's been something, those were the 2 primary, the 2 biggest influences for me, I think.
The book is The Last Commandment, and just kind of curious how you got that idea to write a mystery based on the Ten Commandments, how that all came about. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's an idea that I've had, like I said, for a long time, probably 3 decades. I originally thought of it as a movie idea, and it started with two characters, these two cops, one being Austin Grant, the Scotland Yard cop, and then this New York cop, this younger cop. I mean, Austin Grant's in his 60s and about to retire in 3 weeks. And then John Frankel, who's a young New York cop. And the idea, I think, when you first thought of it as a movie, it was coming off the Lethal Weapon things and movies and stuff like that. And I kind of thought a weird buddy movie where you take two characters who are fish out of water, and put a New York cop in London and vice versa. And then the other thing is, I just always kind of like puzzles and, read a lot of Ellery Queen books growing up. And there was also a guy named Lawrence Sanders who wrote one of the first great serial killer books I remember, which was The First Deadly Sin, which is way before Seven, which was a guy who was killing according to the 7 deadly sins. And then he wrote a couple standalone books, like one called The Eighth Commandment, one called The 10th Commandment, that were sort of inspired by certain commandments. So I guess I got this idea in my head way before Seven ever came out or anything like that. And then by the time I sat down to write it, I'd always kind of known the start and I knew the end, and it gave me a great puzzle, a Da Vinci Code, thing to sort of follow along. But what it's really about is these three characters: the Scotland Yard cop, Austin Grant, this New York cop, and then the Scotland Yard cop's estranged daughter, Rachel, who's a journalist in New York City. It's about those three characters, as is the sequel, which I just turned in and is going to come out this time next summer.
Oh, so cool. So it's a series. This is the first in a new series then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the whole idea. And I mean, I've got like a whole bunch of books. I can write about these characters sort of forever, because they kind of run the gamut of age and what they aspire to do and where they are in their lives and the relationships all three of them have with each other. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I was kind of curious about the process too, because like you said, you have two different detectives from two different countries, in England and in the U.S., and the challenge of researching like how policing works in the U.S. and then in London, and how did you approach all that? Man, was that a challenge?
I mean, I wish I could say I did a lot of research. I mean, I've just read a lot of mystery books where there's a lot of Scotland Yard and British cops and then New York cops. It really came from a character standpoint. To me, like you mentioned, The Equalizer was a television show I did a long time ago that people still seem to like. I mean, they remade it now with Queen Latifah. There was the Denzel Washington movies, but I did it with the original with Edward Woodward, who was a wonderful actor who was in a movie called Breaker Morant, and he was in his 60s. And, I kind of knew how to write for Edward's character, and he was sort of a decent, but, kind of quiet guy who had a wicked sense of humor, and that sort of became Grant. And then Frankel, I think in the back of my head originally, because I thought of it sort of as a movie 30 years ago, I was thinking, Sean Connery at 60 could play the cop, and De Niro in his 30s could play the New York cop. And they were a little more sort of in each other's face. By the time I start to write the novel, what was really interesting is there's a begrudging respect between the two of them, and they really aren't oil and water. And they really become emotionally involved with each other and Grant's daughter. It really came from a character standpoint. And, I looked up a few things like the hierarchy of Scotland Yard commanders and how you get there, and same thing with detectives and everything but the rest of it is really, it's not so, I mean, it's really not a police procedural, even though it's got that element. It really is a character study with these three people. And I like to think it's a page turning puzzle, and it's kind of thrilling and fun, and it's emotional and romantic in places. So it sort of has a whole lot of stuff going for it, I think. At least that seems to be what people who've been reading it have been telling me.
Yeah, I really did enjoy that too. Yeah, like you said, they're the very tight chapters. It really keeps you turning the pages, and you enjoy the mystery. But then as a writer too, that part of my brain starts to kick in. I'm like, wow, how's he doing this? Is that something that you planned? Do you plan that to make it tight, to make it the action continuing? I just kind of wondering about your process on that one, on your writing process.
I kind of really always feel like structure's freedom, but I didn't use an outline for this at all. I just have the structure. I knew the first murder, and I knew who the killer was and how it ended. But, I kind of just sort of said, I want you to keep turning the pages. Harlan Coben, who's a friend of mine, once told me, we did a series together a few years ago, we developed. And one of the first things he said to me is that I want my readers to be really upset with me at 3:00 in the morning when they get to chapter 15. They go, okay, I'm done. And then you go, I got to go to chapter 16. And then one of the things I kind of have always sort of done, I mean, the first half of the book is really Grant's point of view. Then each chapter sort of switches perspectives. And especially in the follow-up, which right now is called Till Death, I use all three of their perspectives. And I kind of like that idea. You get to the end of a chapter, and there's usually a reveal, either a plot reveal, an emotional reveal, hopefully both. And then you're going, okay, I'm going to turn to the next page. And you go, wait a sec, this is not answering that question. It's another character's point of view, progressing the story. And my idea is within the course of 6 to 10 pages that I get you hooked on that story. And then you go back to the next chapter and you want to see what that is, but suddenly you're back in like Grant's point of view. And the idea is just to keep you going. And meanwhile, the emotion kind of sneaks up on you, because that really, it is about the relationships more than anything else.
And did you base your characters on people you know, or is it all in your head?
Interesting you ask that. I mean, I think, like I said, I think the Scotland Yard cop, like I say, who's retiring in a few weeks, and he's, had a rough time of it because his beloved wife died a year ago of cancer, and he's estranged from his daughter. Part of it was I kind of knew Edward's character, Edward Woodward from The Equalizer. Like I said, he had this kind of fun sort of sense of humor that, like, after, you'd be very quiet for a long time, and then they'll hit you with a zinger. And it's like, there's a point in the book when all these horrible things have sort of happened, and it's Christmas Day, and a guy brings a delivery, to him, a box, and the guy just casually asks, he's like, oh, so did you have a nice Christmas? And, Grant just says, not particularly. I mean, that's kind of like what his sense of humor is. So that's where he kind of was. The other thing was, one of the great advantages for me was over the years that I didn't write this 30 years ago, that the perspectives became sort of my own. I mean, I'm in my 60s. And so Grant's perspective is sort of my perspective now. Frankel and Rachel, it's sort of modeled after me and my wife, and how we first met each other 35 years ago. And so it's kind of like that relationship I kind of draw on too. And then I go from there. The other interesting thing about Frankel was, I do think it was that oil and water relationship I was thinking of starting with. But there's a scene really early on in the book when they first sit down in the Astro Diner, which is in this book. It's in the next book too, which happened to be in New York City on 55th and 6th. It's just this little cafe. My wife and I, when we first were married, used to live upstairs in a 1-bedroom apartment up there in New York City when I was doing The Equalizer. And we used to call up and order milkshakes in the middle of the night, which just gives you Frankel's love of milkshakes. I set the first meeting between Frankel and Grant there, and Grant notices that Frankel's wearing a wedding ring, and he says, "Oh, I didn't realize you were married." He says, "No," he says, "My wife left me 2 years ago, and she went off with the super in the building, and she went off to Hawaii, but I haven't been able to take off the wedding ring." And he says, "I don't know if my shrink says if I take it off, it's too big a thing for me. And then I don't know whether I throw it away, et cetera. I guess, he says, I guess I'm just waiting for the right person to come along to take the ring off for." And that sort of really humanized him. And it became the touchstone for me for Frankel through the rest of the book and into the next novel and everything, which is even more emotional than the first one.
You had a lot of success, obviously, in Hollywood with those shows like The Equalizer and Quantum Leap and all those. And that's such a tough business to break into. And so I'm kind of curious about how that worked out for you. And then kind of your opinions now that you're on the book side of the business too. Like any differences or similarities between the two?
I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities, and then there's a lot of differences. And I think the differences is why I like the novel stuff right now. I mean, you mean your question being about like, what it was like breaking in, you mean? Way back when I was writing with a partner, a guy I knew at Stanford, and we're still friends, and we're still doing some, we've kind of gone full circle and are doing some projects for TV right now together. A really wonderful writer, a guy named Dan Pyne. He's got a mystery that's really great that came out early in the year called Water Memory that everybody should pick up and read. So Dan and I were in like a small apartment the size of this computer I'm looking at. He had been married at a young age and they broke up pretty early. And then his wife moved out and I moved in this little apartment. And in the course of a year, we wrote 4 features and a TV pilot. And then we ended up selling the pilot to somebody at Warner Brothers, an idea that I'd had since high school. Nothing ever came of it. And then like 10 or 15 years later, we literally sold it again to NBC and almost got it made at NBC. But what had happened there is I come from a showbiz family because it's really the movie business. They're all producers. And so it was one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to be, I always wanted to be a writer, and I also wanted to succeed on my own. And I thought on the written page, it speaks for itself, producers and everything. I've been a producer for 30, 40 years. I could tell you what it is, but sometimes I can't tell you what it is. My father was a producer. I never knew exactly what he did for the longest time. So the thing was, I knew people through the family, and we were able to get a script to somebody at Aaron Spelling Productions, who passed it along to the guy who was running a show called Matt Houston, and he really liked it. The spec, and had us come in and pitch stories, and they bought a story and they liked the script. And I think everybody gets a door open to where they get something in front of somebody. The one thing I knew after that, you have to succeed on your own. You have to succeed in the work. I mean, for the first 10 years, I wouldn't even talk about, where my family was from. Now, I'm totally happy ever talking about it because 120 scripts later, 4 books later, I'm thinking, okay, I must have done something right. But at the time, that's what kind of got us started. And, it was the same thing with the books. What happened is about 10, 12 years ago, starting when, we've done a couple of King adaptations that have done very well. We did The Dead Zone, which I finished running the last year of that. And then we created this show, Haven, which was based on King's novella or novel, the Colorado Kid that he wrote for Hard Case Crime, and that ran for 6 seasons. And then I kind of met Harlan, somebody put us together, and he had an idea, and we sold it to Fox, didn't get made, but we had a really good time writing. And one of the things I did with Harlan was I wrote this long outline for our project, and I decided to write it in prose like Harlan had written, in Harlan's style, like this 45-page outline. And people thought Harlan had written it, and I really enjoyed doing it. And from that point on, every project I'm doing, somebody who would really never write outlines because structure was pretty easy, I was writing longer and longer outlines, always in prose, and it was the frustrated or or maybe the aspiring novelist in me. And then I had the privilege of working with Karin Slughter, who's a terrific writer, great person, and I've been introduced to her and loved her work. And we sold the Grant County books to Sony and developed that. Again, it didn't go like most stuff doesn't. But at that point, Karin's agent, Victoria Sanders, wonderful agent, Karin and I became friendly with Victoria. Victoria always sort of said, if you really do go write a novel or something like that, you should let me see it. And Karin said, you should give it to Victoria. So at some point I sat down about 8 years ago and wrote my first novel it's called Descending Sun. And I gave it to Victoria, the first draft, and she read it and she really, really liked it. So again, it was the idea of somebody opening a door to get it, to have somebody read something, but they had to like it. So those two things kind of, again, it's what I always tell writers that work with me or the writers I teach. I just go, the one thing as a writer, you can always just write. No one's going to write anything the same way. And I do believe you'll know somebody who knows somebody who'll get something in front of somebody. If it's good, if it's different, something will happen with it. My friends and people I know who are actors, I always say you really got to have, a strong backbone for that, because it's such a random thing. I've sat in certainly enough, casting sessions, auditions where 15, 20 people come in, and any given day, you just got to pick the one out of the 20. And it's like writers, I don't believe you have to go through that as much. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating too. You mentioned that you going great, and then all of a sudden it never makes it to the last stage. So is that just something you just have to get used to in that business, I guess?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've also told people is I know people who are working on the same script, probably the same book too, over and over, and slave over every word to make it perfect, and it's years. And then when it doesn't go anywhere, they're bereft because they put all their eggs into the one basket. I care about, everything I'm working on, but I've learned a long time ago, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So by the time you get to that position, hopefully you got something else you're sort of working on. Like right now, so over the course of this last year, when we knew we were going to that Otto Penzler and Mysterious Press were going to publish The Last Commandment. We sort of made a 2-book deal. So I got to write the second one. And while I'm waiting now, it's now in the copy editing stage. And, so we'll go through all that, but I'm going to start writing the third one, now. And meanwhile, me and Dan, who interestingly, I've stayed friends all these years, because what happened is we started off on Matt Houston together, and then Dan ended up, a little funny, really quick story was that when we finished the first year of Matt Houston, our agent at the time came to us and said, "Hey, I have this client named Tony Yurkovich who's writing this pilot about these 2 cops named Crockett and Tubbs called Dade County Fastlane, about these DE agents in Miami. If you want to maybe go talk to them and hang out with DE agents." I'm like, I don't want to go do that. And Dan decided to go. And of course, that became Miami Vice. Dan comes back. We're starting the next year, Matt Houston. I'm helping Dan break the story for the first Miami Vice episode he's writing. Not only does Miami Vice get put on the air, it gets put on the air opposite our show. So Dan leaves and goes to Miami Vice. And we've stayed friends all these years looking for stuff to do because we hadn't really broken up. We actually split our partnership so we could get paid more because they were getting a good deal for 2 of us for the price of one. But, he's always, it's funny. He's been married 1 year. I'm 34 years. Next month, he's 35 years, now. And we have literally the same anniversary. He's written 5 novels. I've written 4 novels. We read each other's novels first and really kind of help each other, bounce them off each other. And we were always looking for something to do. And then in the last year or two, we literally ended up starting to write some stuff again together, and we adapted The Grifters for Showtime, a modern version of the Jim Thompson novel, the Stephen Frears movie. Mm-hmm. And the script turned out great. Showtime really liked it, but ultimately, like you say, it didn't go forward. But now it's suddenly we have 10 other studio networks that are looking at it. Meanwhile, Dan and I are looking at 2 or 3 other things that have been sent to us to adapt for television. So, right now I'm going, okay, so we're promoting The Last Commandment. I'm going to do the changes on, Till Death. I'm writing the third one. And meanwhile, we're going to probably, hopefully adapt another television series. And if it goes, that's why there's 2 of us. We can figure out how to write our novels and also run a television series. But that's why I say, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah. What's your thoughts too on the last few years with the whole streaming and Netflix? It's just like TV is now so like the premiere thing now is like these television shows. Is that could you ever imagine that it was going to turn like that now to what it's been like the last few years?
I like to say that I and the other person I've been writing with for a lot over the last few years in television is a woman named Sydney McCreary, the person I teach the classes with in Texas. She's a screenwriter, but she also teaches at UT in the grad school there. And we were sort of ahead of this curve of the novels for television. Like we were writing like these kind of things 8-9 years ago. And it was sort of the idea when the streaming was starting. So I think we saw it coming, novels for television. And that is the best stuff, right? I mean, to me, I don't watch much network television anymore. You can tell there's lots of writers, lots of people inputting into stuff. And you're just kind of going like, it's hard to get 10 people sitting around a table agreeing on the movie they just saw. So imagine trying to put a script together. Whereas, the shows that we've been watching recently, like we just, Mayor of Eastwick, the Kate Winslet thing I thought was fantastic. And like Brad Inglesby wrote every episode, right? We've been watching now, catching up with that show Unforgotten on PBS. I forget what the person's name. He's written every episode, I'm not saying it has to be that, but what's really great is, and the great thing about writing novels for me, it's my point of view. It's the story I want to tell. And I think the really good television, especially in the streaming thing, you're watching literally novels for television where 1 or 2 people are responsible for the written vision and usually 1 or 2 directors. And that's why some of the stuff, when it's really good, is really good because it's like reading a novel written by one person. It's supposed to 5 people coming in and rewriting it.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, like True Detective was like that first season. I can't remember the name of the writer, but that was
Nick.
Whatever. Oh yeah, Paluzzi.
And he was a professor, I think. And the first season was great. Except for the ending, but the first season was great.
That is true. It's kind of a weird ending.
It sort of promised to be, at least to me. I kind of thought it was going to have something to be much more specific to Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, and then it was a little random. But
yeah, it's like
unbelievably well done, and like for all of us who love that kind of storytelling, that was a great thing that happened.
And do you feel like writing a television script or a Hollywood script and writing a book, you're saying you're probably a little more control over your book versus a script? Do you enjoy that more, or?
Oh, I mean, I enjoy that a lot more. I mean, the big thing is with television, is you can't just kind of figure it out as you go along, and the surprises that have come from writing the novels. In television, you got too many people who are depending on what you're doing. Everything from directors and actors and people who are shooting it, to studios, to networks, to other producers. So every step along the way, because they need to kind of make these things in 8 or 9 days, which is almost a physical impossibility. You have to have a lot of stuff figured out and done. And it's literally like a train that if you fall off the train, you're done. What I found, I still put a gun to my head writing the books. Each draft is always, of the 4 novels, has been kind of 3 months. Is sort of what it takes me to get through the first draft. But like in the sequel to The Last Commandment, all I knew was the opening scene, which was a great hook. And then I had no idea what the rest of it was going to be. I mean, I had no idea who did it. I didn't know why they did it. And I figured it out as I went along, and I got to the end of it. And maybe it's just because of all the plotting I've done in television and all the thousands of mystery and thriller books, that it sort of kind of came together. But there were such great surprises along the way, because I was the only one who was doing it. And at that point, I'm writing for an audience of one, who is Otto, who's the publisher, right? Because he's the one who has to like it and accept it. And what was really great was when I turned in the book, he had no plot, character, emotion, pacing issues. We just talked about some verbiage in places, and he was really helpful in terms of that. But he said, he is counted on the fact that I knew how to tell a story. And that's the one thing I think I probably do know how to do. It's the best thing I've learned in television.
Yeah. So you think that what you learned all those years in television helped you with writing the book? You were able to funnel that knowledge into novel writing?
Yeah, I think a little bit. Yeah. I mean, except for the fact was I realized in, novels, I can take some time. The biggest thing, and I've said this to a bunch of people over the years and over the last few weeks talking about the book, the thing I always would say about television is that it's not a radio show like this is. So then I kind of realized when I started writing a book, I went, wait a sec, it is a radio show. You have to describe everything. So that was, the interesting thing is, what do you need to tell somebody that they can't see or hear in front of them? But it also allowed it to just have this rhythm. I always kind of write I have music on all the time when I write. I always kind of a rhythm to me. And part of it is I want to make sure that in each chapter that at least I'm pushing the story along. What's been really nice is I've had a few conversations with some really, well-established authors over the last few weeks on some of these interview things. And they're all talking about how much they like the story, and the story keeps moving. And I'm kind of going, that's what's really important to me, because I feel like if you push the story going through, even though all I care about really is the characters, the story is what you get to hang the characters, and it allows you to find out more about. If you do a chapter where I find out a whole bunch about Rachel and Grant's relationship, then at the end of it, I want to make sure to get you to the next one that I do drop some kind of little bomb or something that wants to put you moving the story forward. But in television, you don't always get a chance to do that, because you have to keep things moving. And plus you're writing to a clock basically, right? I mean, TV, it's an hour, right?
Yeah. And imagine you also have all the visuals that you don't have, like you said, you don't have to get as descriptive as you do with a book.
Right. I've also figured out too, that at some point, what I like to do too is in the books is I'll describe up to a point, but then sometimes what you don't describe, right, is better to their imagination. Like, I don't think the murders, even though there are a bunch of murders in The Last Commandment because of the nature of the 10 Commandments, they're fairly gruesome, but I don't spend a lot of time describing them. It's kind of like, there's also a little bit of a wink to it, just the nature of somebody killing according to the 10 Commandments, like the Da Vinci Code, is sort of a fun chase, right? Mm-hmm. And then I kind of figure what I don't tell you is I'll let you go as gruesome or not gruesome as you want.
Yeah, in the reader's imagination. Yeah, let them go there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and so when you're writing a book, what's your writing day look like then? Do you work in so many different projects? Do you focus on one at a time, or do you go back and forth?
I kind of try to carve out for the books, and look, I mean, now, because I knew I was going to write the second one once we sold the first one. So I said, I'm going to carve out some time, which was, from like November through February is when I kind of wrote the second book, the first draft of it. I have a very specific, I'm pretty disciplined, but undisciplined. I'm not one of these writers who sits down every day and writes. I just can't do that. But Billy Wilder used to say when he sat down at the typewriter, it was written, now the computer. And I'm definitely that. I'm always like talking about to my wife what I'm writing. I play a lot of golf, and it's really during the pandemic, we were walking and carrying our bags, 7 miles on the golf course. And I have a buddy who's not a writer, but he'll see me off in the, like, I'll hit the ball in the trees and I'll be, he goes like, what's going on? What are you thinking about? And I'm going, well, if I put Frankel here. And so, I mean, like, I'm always sort of thinking about what that is. Right. And then he kind of heard the story of the book over like 3 months because I was trying to figure things out or taking a walk in the neighborhood. But what I've generally did now was kind of like, if Monday rolled around, I get up early and I start writing early, like by 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm kind of at my computer, and I kind of work till about 11 or 12, where I try and just blast out a chapter. So I just blast out a chapter, like you say, it's usually 2,500 words or something like that, get it onto a page. And then that night I read it out loud to my wife, and just kind of watching her. She's a good audience, and she'll like ask if something confused about something. But then I think about stuff and I go, great, but I don't do anything. I don't ever make any notes. One of the things I'm either blessed or cursed with, I kind of remember everything in my head, and I know I'll remember it when I get back to it. I haven't been writing things down. But then the next day, so that's Monday. Then on Tuesday, what I'll do, okay, I got to write that was chapter 4 on Monday. Chapter 5 is the next one. I'll spend kind of wandering around thinking about what's 5. I usually want to know what's the name of the author. He's great, the guy who wrote the LBJ books. Anyway, he once said that he wants to go to sleep knowing what the first line is of the next that he's going to write the next day. So I usually know, because of the way these books are structured, I know what I'm going to start with the next day, but that's all I know. So I wander around on Tuesday, and at some point I come in here and I go, okay, here's what you do. Just take a piece of paper, put a gun to your head, and write down everything you know about that chapter that you want to happen. And usually it says like bar, kill, love, argument, done, and I don't know what that, but I put that away. And then on Wednesday, I come in and write that chapter. So that way, it's something like there's 3 chapters a week. And over the course of 3 months, you kind of have the book. And then generally what ends up happening is, it's happened in every book so far, the last 100 pages, that pattern changes. Suddenly it's every day, because Stephen King says something I always love. He says, you get to this point, and as a writer, I'm sure you know this too, he calls it the gotta knows. You get to this point where you gotta know how it ends, even though you sort of do. So you're rushing through. And if the last 100 pages or last 50 pages don't come out in a blast, that generally tells you there's something wrong with the 300 pages before it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because you kind of like you're excited to see it to come to everything tie in and everything come to an end. So it's kind of like a rush.
But then what happens is I generally, like on this last one, the one I just finished, because like I didn't know who did it or why they did it. I kind of said, I got to the end, I kind of figured it out about 100, 200 pages of what I thought I was going to do. And I moved it along, and I was really happy with the way it ended. Then I went back to and I'm going, okay, now you got to start over. Because so after that process, I was going to take a week or so, but I said, no, like 2 days later, I put what was like a 470 page, draft. And I put it next to the computer, and I just started retyping it and tightening it and correcting things over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And in the course of what I found out, I really changed like maybe 5% of the plot. It's like, I was thinking, God, what you started with, was never, you ended up like not knowing what you were starting with, but there must have been something in my head that kind of knew, no, this is where you're kind of heading emotionally or plot wise. And, which I guess is a good thing. I think I would have probably figured that out if I was going too far afield while I was writing it.
And what do you use to write? What computer program do you use? Word?
I use Word. Yeah, I use Word, and just I have a double space. And it's like, I'm pretty decent with the computers, but I've always had the funny thing with Word is I found a way to kind of literally put, the double space and the margins, because I always write long. I kind of like, as some writers want to like tighten their margins. Mine are a little wider because I'm kind of going like maybe look at shorter, but it's so they're literally, I've never been able to duplicate this. So I have this one like document that I wrote that's sitting in my saved document files that literally is called something that I literally open it up, and then I literally delete most of it and write the first few words. So when I start the document, it's in that format, because it's just pleasing to my eye. But yeah,
It's like a template.
yeah, it's a template. That's my template. I should,
Yeah.
somebody will show me how to save that, but that's what I end up doing. What do you use?
I use a writing program called Scrivener. It's just been using that for a few years now, and I just like it because it lets you drag chapters around. Because sometimes I write kind of messy.
Yeah, I have friends who use Pages also. They use that.
Yeah, I do use that because once you get into the editing, with working with editors, they all use Word, and I don't have Word, but I have Pages, and then all the comments, everything comes through. So yeah, so once I'm done with Scrivener, then I stay with writing with Pages. So.
Right. Whereas, in television, most of us use Final Draft.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask you about that because that's like the movies, the screenplay writing, teleplay writing stuff.
Everybody sort of uses there was Scripter for a long time. I mean, way back when. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that we were literally writing our first screenplays on IBM Selectric typewriters.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Well, no, we were writing them on our own typewriters, and then a friend of ours had an IBM Selectric typewriter that we would literally say, "We'll take you to dinner for a couple of times, and we can come over and retype the scripts on your typewriter because we don't have to use whiteout," and it was self-correcting.
Yeah, like the fancy stuff.
That was a great thing. And then Dan and I had we had Epson computers were the first computers we had, and then we had those computers with the floppy disks.
Oh yeah. Yeah. My first year in college was in 1987, and like nobody had personal computers. You went to a computer lab.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And now everybody's like kind of writing on their Apple Watch or something like that, right?
Yeah. That is crazy. I haven't been able to master, like on the phone and stuff. No.
No, I kind of like being in my office at home writing. I mean, even with the laptop we have, the laptops and everything. I never liked that much. I mean, and occasionally on a piece of paper, I'll scribble crap, or with dialogue sometimes when I get to force something out, I'll just literally take 3 or 4 blank pages and I'll just scribble like a scene in dialogue, and just whatever comes. I can barely read my writing, and then I basically put it into the book and into the manuscript and have it make sense and read better. Hopefully.
I was curious to know, because you mentioned that you've collaborated with several best-selling novelists, and that's to put it lightly, like Stephen King and Harlan Coben and Karin Slughter. So how does that, now that you're on the other side, are you envisioning are you working to option this out, and how does that whole process work? It sounds so surreal.
It's funny. I've done nothing specific about it because I just really want the books to work as books, and then we can go to that. I mean, we've gotten a couple of inquiries already. I've had long-term, television agents and movie agents for, like my agent who has his own literary agent, done very well for himself. He's been my agent, like he likes to say, 6 months longer than I've been married to my wife. So like for 35 years, and one of his agents who's now one of his partners. She was a manager at some point, and she loves mystery and thrillers, and we read a lot of the same stuff. She's been really encouraging in terms of me pursuing this. So, what happens, I'm kind of going like, I kind of right now want, to get people, interested in reading The Last Commandment. The nice thing has been that almost to a person, everybody who's read it really likes it and really enjoys it. I'm saying, spread the word, tell your friends. And what's really also kind of been cool is that of the maybe 12 or 15 people I have who've read the sequel that I turned in, nobody, I didn't ask them. They just all volunteered that they liked it even better than the first one. And I said, well, that's cool. And I kind of was hoping that, because that's the series television part of it. It's like the reason you like it better is because these characters, and now you're welcoming them into your home or your pages. So I kind of feel like what will happen eventually is if we get some heat and get people to kind of really, that the thing takes off at some point, then, we would maybe turn it into the idea in my head has always been, it was originally a movie, but you haven't read the book. The first book to me is a binge watching 6 to 10 episode television, year of a television show. The second book is the second year. I think that the dream is to have, the book turn into a television series at some point. Now, what's interesting is, like you say, best-selling authors, a lot of them they don't have experience in television. They don't have the time to do television. They have to pump out novels, and they haven't done it. So they pair them up with people like me and fellow showrunners or creators, and we do that. And the creators sort of take the television people take the lead on it. I've always wanted to really firmly embrace the writer, the novelist, and have them be part of it or do it with them. King hasn't done them with us, but he's certainly overseen the pilot stage. But that collaborative process, I really want the novelist to be pleased with what we're doing. But in this case, somebody even asked me, said, well, would you ask me the question saying, would you have another, like, sell it to Hollywood and have some showrunner adapt your things? I'm kind of going, probably not. I'm kind of going like, because in most cases, the novelists have no experience in Hollywood. That's where I came from. I know how to do this. I could put this on television, not necessarily in my sleep, but I know how to do it. I would hire I'm lucky enough over these years that I have a lot of good friends who are really talented writers and showrunners, and they've all expressed interest that we could just put together a staff and we could turn, the books into a television series if and when that time comes. And it'll come when it comes, if it comes.
Yeah, because I totally saw that when I was reading The Last Commandment. I'm like, I could totally see this like a like a Netflix 6-parter.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, I know. I mean, like at some point we'll probably go to. We talked about it. It's just like go to Colin Firth, Hugh Grant, Hugh Laurie. One of these great British actors who could play Grant. Because it's a great part. And then the other two would kind of fall into that and sort of see if we could put it together. But I don't know. It's like it's two different parts of my brain. And right now I'm just sort of saying, I kind of know how to do the TV thing and I can do that. I'll work on it. And what's also nice is by Dan and I, looking at these novels that we're talking about possibly adapting. I mean, one of the things we've been talking about doing, and we're waiting to send to King is a reboot of The Dead Zone.
Oh, nice.
Like 15 years down the line, picking it up 15 years down the line, like the next generation of The Dead Zone. So I kind of like the idea that right now, unless somebody wants to beat down my door and say, we need to make The Last Commandment into a TV series. I like the idea that part of my, the TV stuff is something that gives me a little bit of a respite from the novels, but the novels is kind of like what I'm doing. And like, I'm trying to figure it all out. I don't know anything about this whole process. This is all new to me being, we didn't do this with the first two novels because it was Amazon. I sold them to Amazon's imprints and they kind of do their entire thing. And the idea to actually have this book that's actually in brick and mortar stores. One of the things that was great was the Mysterious Bookshop, which is Otto's bookstore and which started, where he started, doing all that, it's been there it's been in two different places, but for over 40 years. I used to go to that bookstore when I was doing The Equalizer in New York, and I actually met Otto then, and then literally lost touch with him for 30 years. And then suddenly recontacted him last year during the pandemic, and he read the manuscript that I'd finished and he offered to publish it. But I said to them last week, I said, it was always a sort of a dream to have a mystery book, because I love mysteries and thrillers, to see it on the table in the front of the Mysterious Bookshop. And that happened last week or 2 weeks ago, or maybe it's still there. And I just literally said, right before we got on the phone here, I just literally sent 100 signed copies to him. They're putting, these are already all spoken for. And so I'm kind of going like, that's like a sort of bucket list thing, that got to happen. That was like, great.
Yeah, that's good too, because of the timing of it as well. Because if it would have been last year with the whole pandemic, it probably wouldn't have. It would have all been virtual stuff.
Well, it's all been virtual stuff still, pretty much. I think people can come into the bookstore and get it. But yeah, a year ago the bookstore was closed. So
yeah,
get it. So yeah, no, it's nice to be able to, at least they're in brick and mortar bookstores. I mean, look, of course, it's really easy to steer everybody and to me, hey, on my website it says, yeah, go to Amazon, buy the book. This is where you can do it, Barnes and Nobles, etc. But of course, I love independent bookstores. They're like the greatest thing in the world. I mean, Book Soup, which is a store here, and that I've been going to for years. They were kind enough to do an event last week, again virtual. But, it's great. But then I went in and signed some books for them, and there it is on the front counter. So, that to me, for TV boy, at all these shows, I have to say, I mean, like, I've had a very nice, good, solid television career, worked on 25 shows and love doing it. But I've gotten more satisfaction in the last year from writing these two novels than everything television wise, which I can't tell you why, but I have. It's a really cool thing. Getting to talk to people like you about books and writing, it's like a great thing. Television, everybody's kind of going like, how do I get an agent? How do I get It's like,
Yeah.
who's going to star in it? How are they going to screw it up?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't even imagine that world. I was watching a show the other day about Forrest Gump, the making of Forrest Gump, and some
Yeah.
executive said, "Oh, it's getting too expensive. Take out the Vietnam part and the shrimp part."
Yeah, I mean, it's like people don't know. I mean, like it's like it's one of you just don't know, right? My dad, who was ran studios and agencies and was a producer. I mean, it's always been like that. My dad produced at a very young age, like 30 years old, produced Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Oh, okay.
And he used to tell the story. He died like 5 years ago, my dad, but one of the stories he would tell was how they delivered the movie to Paramount and they screened it and they loved it, except for one thing. And they said to my dad and Marty Giroux, his partner, they go, "What is this song that's like playing like my Huckleberry Friend?" And we need to just get rid of the songs, put something in there. My dad said, "Over My Dead Body," right? It's like, this song's like great, right? And sure enough, not only is it in the movie, it's iconic and it won the Oscar, right?
Yeah.
So he was right about that. Well, my dad also was one of the guys who cast Mickey Rooney as a Chinese guy. So that was probably.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah,
it evens up. It's somebody kind of pointed out, like I think I just saw it was on Turner Classic Movies. They were showing things about sort of the culture now, and rightfully so. They said, what were they thinking? And you could actually just pull that section out of the movie and it would fit. They haven't done that, but at least they needed to explain it. So,
yeah, that makes the top list now. Whenever you see about things that wouldn't fly nowadays, and
that's one of them. That's one of them. Yeah. but it's a great movie.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I always ask before I let you go, I always ask, and you're perfect because you've been teaching television writing. So I always have for aspiring writers out there, any advice for them that are aspiring to write a mystery or thriller?
Writers, you're saying for television or for novels?
Well, for novels, but is there a difference you think between?
There's a couple things. I mean, I think write from your heart. I always say, to me, I always just care about, everything's from my heart. That's, I think why people seem to like this book is they really like Grant and Rachel and Frankel. And that's what's really important to me. In television, there's a couple of things. People write for television. Young writers will write spec scripts, which are scripts that are sort of versions of existing television shows. And sometimes that's asked for in certain like competitions you might do, or people can read that. But I always say, write whatever is an original idea, an idea that really you take to heart. Write what you want to write. And I would say the same thing for novels too. The biggest mistake people make, I think, in television, and I don't know much about the book world, but it's like, what do people want? I'm going to write what people want. I want what they want. And I'm going like, who are they? It's like, who are those people? And television is like, you just don't know, right? I mean, and it keeps changing, especially like in the book world, where you write a book and by the time you turn it in and it comes out, it's at least a year from the time you do it. Things change so quickly. So write something that means a lot to you, and write the story that only you could tell. It's funny. I just read this book, The Plot. Pretty cool book. That's something she keeps writing about in the book, saying, write the story only you could tell. And then my dad told me a thing, I had a very interesting relationship with my father, who's really successful. And like what he would say to me when I was going to be a writer, he said, what could you write about that'd be really interesting to millions of people? And I'm going like, I would have put it a different way, but it did have a point, And what I kind of realized was, okay, is find a story that is interesting to people. It's larger than life, like, okay, The Last Commandment. But then I can write stuff about like the milkshake that you get in the diner that's downstairs where you put them, because that I know. And I know what those relationships are like. I don't think I know anybody who's going around killing people according to the 10 Commandments. So literally I can make up this big stuff, which is the fun stuff. But the reason I think people come back to this kind of book and the books I read with these continuing characters. I mean, I read so many of these, mysteries and thriller, like Dennis Lehane's early books about Angie and Patrick, Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch. I mean, these characters, Joe Nesbo's Harry Hole, I mean, all those characters, to me, that's what brings me back. I want to see how those characters, progress. But, if you just were telling their story without these sensationalistic or these larger than life crimes and everything like that, you might not be able to get anybody to look at them. So I think that's the thing. I would say find a way to tell the story and write what you know, but at the same time, you got to put it also into a larger than life thing that anybody would be, it would catch their interest. Because then once they start reading it, they'll stop even, they'll like the plot twist and everything like that, but they're going to like the characters. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think that's good. That's good advice. Yeah. And it's important too, because so sometimes you start worrying too much about what you think people want, and then it ends up being a mess.
Yeah, and how many times have we seen things that succeeded where everybody says, nobody thought that had a shot in hell?
Yeah.
Well, those are the same people who literally, it's like, you just don't know. I mean, to me, my father, when he was running, and my grandfather, great-grandfather, all these guys have stories like this. But I remember as a kid, my father was running Warner Brothers in the 70s, and he'd made The Towering Inferno and he made The Exorcist, in terms of, they produced those movies, which are huge successes. And I walk into my dad's study and one night, and he's reading The Galleys to a book. And I go, what is it? And he says, oh, it's about this little island community off Cape Cod, and they're terrorized by this shark. Mm-hmm. I go, oh. And he said, it's by this guy, Peter Benchley's, called Jaws. And I said, oh. So they decided not to make it. And they were just laughing all the way because it was supposed to cost $2 million and Spielberg spent 10, at Universal. They thought, oh, we made the right move. Then the movie comes out, and 2 or 3 weeks later, my dad left Warner Brothers. So it's like, you just don't know. That's the lessons I learned from it. You just take your best shot, write your heart out, put it all over the page, but then save a little bit of it up so you can go to the next thing, because they're probably going to, cut it to pieces. So you have a little bit left.
Well, that is a rough business. It's like, what have you done for me lately? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And so where can people find you? What's your website?
My website is Scott Shepherd, SHEPHERD, author.com. And if you go on there, so ScottShepherdAuthor.com. And if you go on there, you can, I've been trying to do the whole Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter stuff, really Instagram. And luckily, befriended a lot of authors and book bloggers who are saying really good things. So yeah. And you can find out how to buy the book, and you can read some reviews, and there's some interviews like this. We'll put this interview up there when you let me know that's ready. And that's how people will be able to, see these things and find out a little more.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Scott. And I highly recommend people go get the Last Commandment. It was a great mystery, and the characters are awesome. So yeah, I highly recommend it. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Alan. I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with one of your favorite writers of mysteries and thrillers, or if this episode's guest is new to you, I hope you give their books a chance. Helping listeners discover new authors and books is one of the coolest outcomes of doing this podcast. As always, you can head over to thrillerauthors.com to sign up to my Thrilling Reads email list. That way you won't miss out on any great deals in thriller and mystery books. You can also check out all the links and resources in the show notes for this episode over at thrillerauthors.com. And also please do subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and leave a rating and review wherever it is that you're listening to this show. If you have done that already, I thank you. I really do appreciate your support. For my other links to my author website, social media haunts, and more, check out thrillingreads.com/links. All my links will be on that page. So that's it for this episode. See you next time, and stay safe out there.